Hello there! Welcome to Automation Impact Podcast. My name is Eduard Shlepetskyy. I'm UiPath MVP and founder of Active Automation. In this podcast, together with UiPath most valuable professionals and other guests, we are sharing our experience and best practices in intelligent automation. To learn more about the podcast, visit automationimpact.io. There, I also post short summaries for each episode. Also, you can contribute to the development of this podcast by subscribing and sharing it with your colleagues, friends, and community. Let's learn and grow together. Enjoy listening. Hello everyone. Today we are discussing Agile as a delivery methodology together with Tracy Dixon, who is Senior Manager and RPA and Project Manager at Centric Consulting, Miami. She is based in Jacksonville, Florida, and she is UiPath most valuable professional. Tracy, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Maybe for the very beginning, you give us and our audience a short background about yourself, like how did you start with automation and what brought you to this exciting journey?
Sure. So I have a computer science degree in information systems. I started out as a programmer a while back in Visual Basic, and then I moved into project management. I always automated things in Office just to help myself as a project manager. Always wanted to do things more efficiently, and so was always looking for really a tool to do those things better. I looked at macro recorders, just was always, thought there had to be something more than Office automation. And so a few years ago found UiPath and thought this is what I've been searching for. And so that's where my RPA journey began back in 2018. And I've been, all about RPA ever since.
So your RPA journey started directly with UiPath, right?
It did, yes, with the Academy, and I just dove deep into that and started automating things for myself since that point, for sure.
Yeah, and you mentioned automation in the early days, and then you moved to project management. With this move, do you still code? Do you still program? Do you still develop also robots, or for yourself as well as for a customer? So maybe you can describe what are you currently doing and in what percentage you are still managing the projects and if you are coding anyhow.
So I wear both hats. I can be the sole technologist. After I first learned UiPath, I was the sole technologist 100% of the time for the better part of that next year. I can wear both hats. So it just depends. Just depends on the client situation and the projects that we're on. I have been the RPA architect. Currently for the past few months, I've been on several project management, focused projects. Sometimes I've got several projects, at the same time where I'm wearing the architect hat and an RPA role. So it just happens to depend on what the need is. We do a lot of custom projects. So for the first year or so thereafter, it was really devoted to exclusive RPA.
Got it. And out of all the roles you have mentioned, what's your preferred one, or what is the role you would enjoy most if you take away all the customer expectations as well as company expectations? If you are given the whole day doing something, like one thing, what would it be? Would you code? Would you do the architecture stuff, or you would have fun with the project management?
So if I had to pick, I would probably be doing RPA architecture with something really new and innovative where we're, thinking about new things, doing something really new and exciting, getting to do something on the cutting edge. That's the fun stuff, getting to do something amazing that people haven't done before, getting to think about totally new stuff. Got it.
And talking of Agile, talking of our today's topic, when was the first time you heard that? And how did you first experience Agile? So what was your first impression of it?
So back in 2004, the concept of standing up to do meetings, really short 15-minute meetings, was introduced at the company that I was working for, which was and I was a project manager at the time, and thought that's weird. There were a bunch of sticky notes on the wall, and we were introduced to the Scrum philosophy way back then, and thought, wow, that's really kind of strange and weird. So it's been quite a while where we were introduced just to Agile as part of a software development team.
How and if it evolved since then, since 2004, so we have over 15 years since then. Was the methodology changing, or it is as it was 15 years ago?
Well, the basic philosophy is the same. Just the core principles are the same as they were. They came out in 2001, and they're still the same as they were. Those have not changed. What has changed has been the maturity of how to scale Agile. So the frameworks on how to grow with size, and those have become more developed. They really didn't exist. At least my knowledge of them definitely didn't exist back then on how to do that with a sizable team versus a smaller team. That for sure, at least to me, is different. And I guess just the, more details around the philosophies, how to handle it without everyone being in the same room with a small team, those types of things. International teams, those have been more fleshed out and developed.
Yeah, and especially now in COVID times, I think it is very actual topic nowadays,
sure.
right? When even if you are located in the same city, not always you can go and see each other or book a meeting room or something like that. So now it is as actual as never before. All right, and maybe let's try to define it together for those listeners who are hearing it for the first time, even if it is hard to imagine, considering like how buzzy this word of agile was. And there are a lot of stereotypes about the agile itself and what it is and what it's not. Like there should be a small team, it is always failing, and many different things, which some of them are right and some of them are wrong, applying to agile. But before jumping there, let's define what is agile and what makes it different to other delivery methodologies, and to be particular to waterfall.
So Agile is different than you might hear waterfall, predictive. So Agile these days, in project management terms, you might hear also called adaptive. It is not the same as Scrum. Scrum is a flavor of Agile. There are a number of other flavors that you don't hear as often. Extreme programming is one. There are a lot of others that you really don't hear very often at all. Feature-driven development is another. And there are a good 4 or 5 other types of Agile philosophies. What they really mean is that they're iterative, they're cyclical, where old style of software development was that you sit together and you think about how things are going to be done in advance. You lay out the scope and time and cost, and you think through the requirements in advance all at once. You lay out the vision for how it will all happen at one time. Where an Agile philosophy, you do that in cycles. You don't have to think through everything in advance. You think through some, just enough. You get going on a bit of it, and then you have your customer or some surrogate of a customer take a look, check in to see if you're on the right track. They give you some feedback, and then you take that feedback, incorporate it, and then you do a bit more, and you take another cycle of that. They inspect it, and you repeat that cycle again and again. So instead of thinking through all of it, you think through a bit and get feedback and incorporate that and repeat again and again. So you don't have to plan all of it, but plan just a bit of it. And that way, instead of going down a long path where you may or may not be doing the right thing, you've gone down a small bit of the path. And that way you fail a lot faster if you are going down the wrong path, instead of potentially going down a very long path and then you find out you may have not hit the mark.
Yeah. And now I'll try to describe it in two extremes. So on the one hand, you have, let's say, development team and guys who are just saying, let's start doing it, and on the way, while doing, we'll find out. Yeah, so we will definitely discover new issues, we'll discover new findings, as well as some exciting things, and let us start doing, and then we will upgrade and inform you how it is going while developing. And on the other hand, I see more conservative approach when, and we are still quite often meeting it in the business, when we see that the customer says, or even internally the management says, that we give you a budget only if we know how much it will cost us, how long it will take, what everything it will bring, how many people you need to involved, etc., etc. And here I see two completely different mindsets, and I'm curious, how do you observe it in your business? Like, how open are management and companies to this approach of, as you describe, adaptive, when we start and then somehow we adapt and see how it goes? How open people are, especially in decision-making positions?
Right. Well, it doesn't mean, wild, wild west. It doesn't mean a blank check. So there still can be constraints. It doesn't mean that, here you go, you can take years. It's okay to say, we'll iterate until September, or we're still going to produce something by the end of the year. We'll see what we can get produced during that time, that type of thing. So it doesn't have to mean that, there's no end date. So there can still be limits. I know that it's definitely a misconception that a lot of leadership folks do get a little nervous that it can go on forever, that there's no constraint and that it will never get done, those types of things. And so they have to be able to put trust that there is a good business representative that knows what the highest value is to the end consumer, that they have a good steering wheel. They are going to lead the ship, that they're going to pick what is of most value, and that they will adapt to what is at most value at the time. Their competitors could pivot at any time. If they've got a good product manager in place, then they should be able to pivot very quickly, perhaps even before their competitors, if they have that right person steering the ship, so to speak. So it could be a real advantage if they can put their trust in that right person, or they can adapt very quickly, even before others, to the right things. If they can't, they could be very slow and behind their competitors. It can be a real disadvantage. So the negative to that is they can be very slow and very behind others, and not moving quickly at all, and then lose significant market share. Yeah. So also, it is important to highlight here that Agile enables you to act faster, right? So maybe with less prerequisites, less conservative, but Agile enables you to act faster. And this is one of the characteristics of it. Another is, you mentioned iterations. I have just one question to these iterations. Do you have some standard duration for iterations, or you try to adapt it to business, to project, to a reporting lifecycle, etc.? Do you have some standard iteration duration in mind? They typically are between 1 and 4 weeks, so not long. You don't want to go 6 months before you get feedback. So that the idea is that you're getting feedback quickly. The project itself may not necessarily be faster. However, it will be more on target with what the end user had in mind. So the idea is that you fail faster. You put something in front of that customer faster, they are able to go, oh, that's not quite what I had in mind. It should be this. That whatever you end up producing is much higher value to them than what you would have produced otherwise. You get whatever they wanted to them with a much higher value than they would have had otherwise. So it's not necessarily that, you would have produced it in October and now it will be September. It's not necessarily that about the end date, but what you will be giving them is of much more use to them in the end. And what are the factors which make you decide if it is like 1 week iteration or 2, 3, up to 4 weeks iteration? So is it
more depends on the business, or you still have some metrics how you define, okay, for this project we would go with 2 weeks iteration or 1 week iteration or 4 week iteration?
So some of that is team culture. Some of it is about what can be produced in a week. If you can't meaningfully produce something substantial in a week that the customer can react to, where you can configure something properly in a week and have working deliverable differences in a week, then a week is probably not appropriate. So you probably see more often 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. I would recommend not doing that unless it needs to be 4 weeks, because the goal each time is to have working software. It needs to be fully working in good order where you can demonstrate something to that customer. So the shortest cycle where you can have fully functional, features given to that customer. So part of it just depends on whatever tool, how difficult it is to put features into that tool. But you generally want to have, tiny chunks of functionality, that type of thing. So part of it's just that whatever technology might be in use and how difficult it is to add features with that given technology.
Got it. So actually you define it by also understanding if there is a possibility within the one iteration to deliver minimal product, actually, which can be already acting independently or be a quite significant piece of the whole project. So by that you can see, for example, that within 1 week you can build, 3 or 4 components which can run independently. Then you would go even with 1 week iteration. And what I understand from what you explain is that you rarely go for another extreme for 4 weeks iteration, because you want to get this feedback as frequent as possible and as early as possible, right?
Right. You want each item to be, singular, for sure, where it can be demonstrated independently, if possible. And the team should be deciding. So it's not something where management decides how long the sprints are, the iterations are. It's something the team should be self-managed. So the team decides this together, and the team is relatively small, typically less than 10 people. So the team together decides how long is appropriate, how long they feel that they can not only create this, but test it together, how long they feel that they can have a solid piece of functionality that they feel comfortable demonstrating to that customer, given that time frame, what they feel comfortable with.
Got it. And here we are getting to the next question. One of the criteria is iteration, and another you just mentioned about the team size. So is it somehow there are the stereotypes that Agile is about, 2 or 3 developers somewhere in garage doing something. And question to you is team size one of the criteria of Agile as well? That, for example, the team is usually not larger than, 6 people or 3 people, or it is more as a stereotype?
So there are general guidelines. So the Scrum methodology in particular, I believe that what they've got written is 6 plus or minus 3. So typically less than 10 people, including those that are testing. Those are general guidelines. I don't know that it's, a hard and fast rule that, it can't be Agile if it's 10 people. However, they do want to keep it to smaller teams, for sure. So you're building small pieces of functionality. You want it to generally be focused on small things that are testable. The smaller it is, that the quicker that you can move on, that the easier it is to track, the easier it is for you to move to the next item, and so on. So it's not necessarily, 100% hard and fast rule. And Agile, the rules are not made for them to be 100% followed like a checklist. It's more about the philosophy. As long as the philosophy is adhered to, that is always more important than checking a box on a checklist.
Got it. And while having this discussion, I think that we already listed quite some benefits of this methodology, but maybe once again, can you name what are the main benefits of Agile? Why companies should consider going Agile while implementing some software?
So we've mentioned a few times faster feedback from customers. You have typically some type of product manager or business oriented person that either is a customer or is a surrogate for a customer that can provide feedback quickly. Easy adaptation to change. So old system of doing software, you hear about a change request, everyone cried, it was terrible, you did, the forms, and that was not a good thing. With the Agile methodologies, change is expected and welcomed. You adapt to change. You want change. You know that change is coming. So you want change to occur. Totally different philosophy where you know what's going to happen. Either methodology, this time it's actually embraced. With the Agile methodologies, you find out about problems a lot earlier. With Waterfall, you don't necessarily know that the problems exist because you haven't shown your customers the product. In these philosophies, you're showing product constantly where they have the opportunity to see whatever it is that you're building and say, oh no, that's not what we had. This is not what we wanted. This is not what we had in mind at all. So they have that opportunity and to give feedback. With the Agile methodologies as well, there are a lot of different pieces, and the creation of a backlog, which is just a list of a number of items. That business person, that product owner is typically the name, can then look at that list of items and prioritize what is of most value to that business unit, where they can choose and rank what is of most importance. And that can change at any time. They have regular meetings. So this week they can rank what's most critical and the team work on that. A week or two later, based on the timing of the cycle, they can reprioritize. It doesn't have to be forever. It's not a one-time thing. So they have that flexibility to do that and to change priority at any time. And it's expected because things change. Competitor could have done something significant last week that totally changes your whole world. That's the adaptability and the flexibility, because business changes and things change, and COVID could have happened last week, and now your whole world is a completely different thing and your priorities are completely different. So that's the flexibility of adaptive methodologies like this. So also that what we talked about, the customer sees the product, they can put their eyes on it, they can imagine it, where in the waterfall methodologies, without being able to look at it, customers just they can't imagine what is going to be produced. And it's a whole different world when they can actually see it. They can then go beyond and add things to it, or, see it in a different way, or then perhaps give different requirements or adjust, or say, oh, well, yes, I did ask for that, but that's not what I really wanted. And no, then, a whole lot faster. So those are just a few of the benefits for sure.
And especially when speaking about this, seeing the early result, I always, whenever you start an RPA project, you run those RPA people awareness sessions when you get, you are introducing robots to people, right? And you then encourage people to submit some ideas. And usually people like those enthusiastic, they're bringing some ideas in place and you form the initial backlog, but the results after running the first robot in company, or after running first few robots in a company, is much different when people are not hearing it about as a theory, and they are not just seeing that, okay, in another company we were automating SAP, when in this company they are not using SAP at all, or Salesforce or any other technology, where it is always helping a lot when you have a robot running in premise, even if it is not the biggest one, not with the highest saving, but you have the first small piece of technology in-house, what enables imagination. It enables imagination of the customer, enables imagination of your SMEs, business analysts. They are not speaking about some virtual product which you will see in 2, 3, 5 months, but they already see the result after 1 or 2 weeks. What triggers always new ideas. Whenever one colleague in the department has already a robot capable of doing that type of job, in quotation marks, all the other colleagues around, they are starting to see it and having a new ideas of what else robot could do for them. Yeah. So this is another advantage of Agile, that it makes technology and makes the whole development visible to people, so they know that it is somewhere next to you, but not something what in 3 years would somehow hit the business and no one knows if in good or a bad way.
Right, that's exactly right. It becomes real, and then they build their knowledge on that little real piece, and suddenly it gets them going where they then have something to build on, and it makes the rest of the requirements a whole lot more real.
Yeah. You mentioned also that the methodology itself is change friendly, or you expect changes, right? And you expect this reprioritization, change requests, and many other things. But what about changes within the iteration? I know, and maybe this is my stereotype thinking and not the best knowledge of the methodology, but as far as I know, whenever you define the iteration, usually you don't allow to apply any changes within the iteration. So you allow customer or whoever, the stakeholder, to bring other pieces into a backlog. You allow them to reprioritize and say that now this piece is the highest priority, and as soon as you finish the iteration, you go with that one. But what about changes within the iteration? Is it possible?
So we do typically try to limit those. So say a given item, if there are new requirements found, those are normally added to the backlog for next time. So, given item, we realize, we need some additional features added on this item that we didn't realize were needed. Those would be added to the backlog, and they could certainly be added to the next iteration. If it is, say, that the developer estimated a given item and thought it would be 2 points and it's 3 points, so points is the way that agile items are typically estimated as a representation of how long something is. That is typically expected to be something that the team would cover. So that is something that the team did make that commitment, that the team would huddle together and live up to that commitment. So the team would step up and perhaps work the extra hours to cover that type of thing. But it is expected that, if they committed to covering a given item and the requirements given for that item, that is lived up to, that type of thing. But if there are new ones, then those would be covered in another iteration.
And while developing, especially if now we are getting a little bit closer to RPA, while let's say that you have a 2 weeks iteration, you're developing your solution, which consists of many modules, etc. And customer in the middle of iteration, let's say like the 5th day, what is right exactly the middle of your development, realize that some steps are completely different, but you still have a goal to accomplish something by end of this iteration. Would you just park those components which are affected by the change and let them to be reprioritized and changed in the next iteration, or you would still finalize it and then adapt it in the next iteration? So as soon as you realize that the component in the form, how it is designed originally, is not anymore usable, do you park it? You don't touch it till the end of iteration, or what's happening with it?
So sometimes inevitably that happens where you realize you can't complete an item as it was intended, or it won't be functional. So that the idea in Agile is, functional software. You want working software. So if it cannot work as designed, sometimes you will remove an item from the current sprint, a certain number of points, if you need to add points in order to get that piece of software working. Sometimes you can do a swap out like that. If you discuss with the team and there's a choice like that, sometimes a certain item may need to extend to the next sprint where that item will not be demonstrated in the given sprint. So there can be multiple ways to cover something like that. It isn't something that you would want to happen with regularity.
And I'm always curious about those scenarios. Do you keep extra backlog, or are you open, for example, if you need to park some items, I would assume that it doesn't mean that you deliver less. Do you have extra backlog from which you are open to take also within the iteration in case that you see that some of the components you will not deliver? or how this is handled? Because sometimes whenever the change is coming in, I assume that you need to park the specific module, especially sometimes it is not only about the development and applying the changes, but sometimes customers say that, I don't know, or for example, this lady or this man went for a vacation and they will be back in 2 weeks. So do you, when planning the iteration, are you planning like 120% to deliver or something like that? How do you handle this part?
So you definitely, regarding vacation time, you would plan for people's vacation. So you would definitely reduce, the point capacity based on people not being available or knowing they would need to commit time elsewhere. The hope would be that people would be full-time committed to that project. That's always ideal, that they would be a full-time team. That's always the ideal. Reality is that's not always the case, but it's always ideal to have the team fully committed to a single product, all working together. So if someone's going to be out, you would reduce the number of points that the team commits to for that given iteration. And it is definitely something that's reasonable to commit a certain number of points for fixing bugs, depending on where you're at in the cycle. Definitely as you get closer and closer to a full production release, that would be expected that the number of points that would be reserved, likely for bugs would be higher and higher. And if you have additional capacity, it is perfectly fine for the team to choose to pull in additional items based on that priority that's given. The product owner would have given the certain list, and they can definitely grab more things as they see fit. If they've got, they're toward the end of the release and they've completed everything that's there, for sure pull more items in.
Maybe a tricky question, but does the team have a choice to don't pull the items? So in case that you are earlier in delivery, can you have like half a day or 1 day rest, or how usually these things happen? Or whenever you realize, okay, we are done with the original part, we pull in some items?
They would be expected to do things. So they would, it is the team's choice. They would be training. There would be something that the team would self-manage. They could be doing, other things for sure. There could be some type of reward type thing that the team would be self-managed. So it should be up to them. That there could definitely be rewards. There could be some type of training activity. There could be some type of experimentation for a future release. Experimentation should be definitely built in. You want, again, a fast failure type thing. There could be something that, it could be choice A or B in the future that has never been tried before. You welcome that. You want one of those to fail very early on in a small amount of time, something you don't spend, weeks or months on in the future that has excessive cost, but something that's failed at very quickly. That's encouraged definitely in Agile.
So you still have a high motivation to finish earlier the iteration or the scope of iteration, because then you have time for play around, I would say, but this whole play around is still within the project. So you can test those different scenarios, go for exploring and discovery of the technology and those A/B testing or A/B scenario, etc., to contribute even more to the product itself, right?
It could be a full iteration dedicated to an experiment.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily have to be the scenario of just finishing an iteration early. So it doesn't have to be a tiny amount of time, dedicated. It could definitely be more significant than tiny bits here and there.
Got it. Good. And moving on, what are the disadvantages of this methodology? We highlight quite well what works in Agile, what doesn't work, or what are the disadvantages which you face in your experience?
So it does take some training, and it's definitely not a one-shot type of thing. You do want to learn whatever given philosophy is chosen, and it's ongoing. Agile is about continuous improvement. It's not go to Agile 101 and you're done. It is built into every release. Not only are you learning about the software once, but you want to get better and better at Agile. The team should get better, the team specifically about that product, but part of Agile is cross-training, people being able to perhaps do multiple roles, getting better and better at the Agile methodology. You also definitely need leadership alignment. It's not something that just the team does. your leaders need to be supportive. The organization mindset needs to change. It's not just that the team does Agile. Your leaders need to be supportive of the team being an Agile team. That means enabling the team, being supportive and trusting of product owners, of the team, of allowing the team to self-manage, of allowing the team to fail fast, to experiment, to have rewards, to self-manage, period. Managers may not be comfortable with allowing the team to take the reins to do those things. They need to be comfortable with those concepts and ideas and what the benefits are. They won't be perfectly comfortable with all of those concepts without some understanding and knowledge of the benefits and what all of those things lead to. So they're going to need training and understanding and be led along with everybody else about the philosophies and the long-term benefits also. So there is definitely organizational change and some transformation from leadership down, not just with the Agile team. It can be difficult to scale. It's not just the small team. Some of the more recent philosophies like Scaled Agile Framework, SAFe, they can be a little bit more complicated. That can require some wider training and even more organizational understanding, particular terms and philosophies that can be definitely a larger training effort where you have to bring folks in and could be a larger undertaking for sure.
Got it. And also talking of management alignment, if I'm new to Agile, or we are to pitch the methodology to a management who didn't work back in the past with Agile, what are the things we need to highlight for them? And especially, probably here, I would not rush only with selling it, saying like, okay, the faster feedback, etc. But what are the things they need to be prepared in terms of, I wouldn't say the negative, but more challenging the traditional mindset things? What would be very different to what they get used to in waterfall, or in other words, predictive project management?
The idea of starting, not sitting back and planning for long periods of time first, that's very different. Not having lots and lots of documentation and planning early on can be a little uncomfortable. That can also swing too far. Agile does not mean just go start without documentation. That can very much swing too far, and it doesn't mean that. It means just enough documentation, and there's a balance. So you want to make sure that you have an appropriate amount where your developers have enough that they feel comfortable in building the right thing. If they don't have enough, that can be quite the problem also. If they're building stuff and it's not the right thing, they obviously didn't have enough documentation to go into the right direction. So that can be very odd to start quickly without this lengthy process in place. Enabling a team to start doing a lot of things without management direction, that can be an uncomfortable process. So the idea of stepping back and letting the team do their thing without you saying, okay, you start the meeting and you do this and you do that's very odd. A Scrum Master typically is supposed to step back in a daily Scrum and not talk. I don't think you even see that much these days at all. Traditionally, I don't see it much. That can be very uncomfortable. So it's very different than what a lot of managers are used to.
Yeah, so you need to be ready to shift more accountability and responsibility towards team, and also control, right? So you need to give away at a certain point, you need to give away control or let team organize themselves and be a little bit more flexible, with trusting them on the end of iteration that they will come up with what you expect, and still more or less, right? So it is not always like 100% what we expected, but having this short iteration allows you to exchange this feedback quite frequently, right?
Right.
And here also still staying with disadvantages of Agile, I'm curious, did you have also negative experience with that? Like when we were preparing for this episode recording, you mentioned that you can talk about Agile for days, right? And I see you're very enthusiastic about this methodology, and it is great. But also, as with any other thing, nothing is perfect, yeah? And I'm curious, did you have any negative experience with the methodology or particular project delivery situations with Agile?
I have, and I it's tended to be when organizations call themselves Agile, and when you actually look at what they've implemented, they're really not. Where the team may be Agile, they may have a meeting called a Scrum, but it's the same meeting that they held before. They just call it the Scrum meeting on the invite. It's the same thing that they used to do, that the organizational mindset is not Agile at all, that the manager goes in and says, all right, you know, what did you do yesterday? That's not really a Scrum, where the organizational mindset really is not trusting of the individuals, that the individuals are not self-organizing, the individuals really didn't get enabled to do much of anything. It's the same old, same old. It just happens to be that they want something released every few weeks. That's the difference. That's not really Agile. That's just frequent releases. So that's not the Agile methodology. Releasing something every few weeks is just releasing something every few weeks. That is not the Agile methodology. That's something different entirely. So that's not really successful Agile. Agile is a mindset. It is yielding to see team collaboration. It is stepping back and waiting to see which member of the development team is going to speak first about what they're doing, to see them solve problems, to see them talk about experimenting and about which direction they may go for the next release, to see the product manager really stepping up about what's most valuable in the next release, and see them really empowered to talk about what's of most value, and without them having to go ask permission for priority. Those types of things.
Got it. And speaking of Agile, is there any differences in like traditional software development and RPA development? Are there any RPA specific aspects which you apply when using Agile methodology?
So there are. I would say in general, RPA is a bit of a different project in that the requirements are very specific. RPA needs a very specific set of instructions. So every keystroke, every mouse click, the robot needs to know, because it needs to mimic the exact set of steps that the human typically goes through. So it has to be very exact. The typical set of software requirements usually aren't as precise as those requirements. So I think in general, software requirements aren't nearly as specific as RPA requirements in general. So on the whole, you have to be quite more detailed than you typically would have to be. So that really makes it difficult to be, to give less documentation, like you normally could in Agile. However, I think where you can be more Agile is really in a couple of places. So first, in error handling, what I like to do is test-driven development, which is not necessarily a feature of Agile per se, but it incorporates Agile philosophies. So test-driven development is writing a test before you write the code itself. So if I'm going to develop a certain feature or a certain process, before I write one line of code or develop anything, I sit and think, how am I going to test this piece alone, not in the midst of all of this process, but this one piece by itself? How am I going to test that just this works? And not have to test it in the middle of the whole process. So test this alone. I write that test before I write the code. So I know yes or no, this piece and this piece alone works. So that's the philosophy of test-driven development. Incorporating that and knowing that yes or no, this piece works first, that definitely incorporates Agile principles and values, that specific requirement itself.
So here we are speaking about, I know it as a unit testing, particularly for the small pieces of code. Later we will get also to the integration testing, etc. But here doesn't mean that in your projects, one of the prerequisites is that whenever you start developing the component, you start with creation of unit test module or unit test folder with all the prerequisites, files, or even maybe sometimes hard coding values, because I think that this is completely right thing for unit testing, right? That you prepare for you some arguments, and not only for the testing itself, but also for later reusability. This is what we encounter quite often in our projects, that, for example, you develop the module, you tested it somehow. If you don't create the unit test and then you want this module to be reused, you leave it there in a folder. But if someone touch it in 3, 6, 5 months, whatever, no one knows in what place you were running it, or with what parameters you were running, with what parameters it was failing, with what parameters it was passing. So I really share this experience with you. We are doing very similar thing. For any module we develop, we create a unit test folder in which we leave all necessary parameters which would allow any developer later to just plug in and test it without going to business and say, could you pass me a customer number or credit order number or whatever, just for me to try the module, right? So you leave all these things there for a long time, not only for testing purpose, but also for reusability and review later, right?
Right. And I have the same thing. I have a file build. It follows the same name as whatever process I'm building. So it's a standard that's built before I even build that given process. So very easy to follow, built before I even start, where I have thought through, I know what the arguments are going to be, that type of thing. So it's pretty straightforward. So that for sure. Another thing that I have, that I incorporated to the process, for a couple of weeks, typically the users, as far as error handling, they normally don't think of errors in the way that RPA developers think of errors. So, or exceptions, whenever they have come up with the list of how the process works, step 1, step 2, step 3, they don't think about a pop-up, or, maintenance window on Friday night warning that comes up every 3 months, or those types of things that they just press yes because they're humans, and that's easy. I have them for a couple of weeks, note any anomaly, good or bad, but keep an eye out and take a screenshot and keep an ongoing document. But, a couple of people in the department keep an ongoing eye out for anything of that nature and send to me. So those types of things really are creating a backlog for us of potential exceptions, errors, that type of thing that then later on in the process, a product owner could look at and evaluate how frequently do these types of things occur. Will this, is this something that may stop the bot in the future? This unhandled pop-up or these types of issues, but likely are things that they would never consider an error because it's just a little box that, of course, they just click it when it comes up every Friday night that they never thought of before, those types of things. So error handling for sure is one of those things that just, it ends up creating a backlog that inevitably that there are things that users are just not going to think of as errors that will be future issues for sure that would never make it to that instruction set, that standard instruction set.
Got it. And here,
sure. Mm-hmm.
Got it. And here, as you described, definitely customer would appreciate realizing this pop-up or whatever else there is as an issue, realizing after 1 or 2 weeks iteration, but not after 3 or 6 months of development. Yeah.
Right.
Here, question would be: do you also, if you finish 80% of the process within the first iteration, you still know that you are to build additional scenarios which are not yet handled, which you leave for the second iteration. Would you let the process run in production during the first iteration, or you let it run in test system? But question is, would you let it run while knowing that it is 80 or 70% complete?
So that's really for the product owner to decide. It depends. So in the case, my first bot where it was hospice patients and them getting bedside care as fast as was possible, that was something that had to be working 100% of the time. Definitely not. In the case of some other process where it working most of the time was just fine, perhaps yes, and it would be fine, and humans could pick up the rest. So it just depends on the scenario, and that's really for the team to decide. Totally depends on the type of process and the type of circumstance.
Got it. Okay, we are getting to the second part, or maybe closer to the end of this episode, and I would like to ask you to define the Agile. So what are the core principles, and how would you define it in several sentences? Like, what are the aspects of Agile? What you were mentioning before, also saying that, for example, that customer thinks that, okay, they do iteration and they are already Agile, or they do, they are small team, so they are already Agile, or they let it fail every second day, so they are already Agile. So maybe we can speak about what are the criteria to characterize it? Like, what is Agile? How do we understand that we are Agile?
Sure. So back in 2001, there was an Agile manifesto created. So for anyone that wants to read that, it is out on the internet at agilemanifesto.org. And there were a few core philosophies that were proposed as central above any other rule. So they are individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan. That's it. Everything else is, a philosophy based on those core principles.
Yeah, and everything else is also discussable. As you say, that there are also different sub-methodologies or different directions or streams of Agile, right? And there are deviations, but I would definitely also recommend to visit the page. It is really in nice and short manner summarizing what the Agile is and what Tracy just mentioned for us. All right, and then talking of maybe what Agile is not, or I would like to speak with you about what are the often myths you see when facing customers or overall reading about the Agile. So what are the often myths about the delivery methodology itself?
So I think one of the items that I hear most often is that Agile projects are faster. That, we're going Agile so we can get this work done faster. It's not that a project will be done any faster. It's that the end result will be of higher value than it would be otherwise. So it's not that, it's going to be done any sooner than a waterfall project. That's not what it's about. It's about the value of that end result. So it won't necessarily be done faster. Another is that Agile projects don't really need documentation. So you do need documentation. You need requirements. They may be a lot less bulky. You don't need nearly the extensive requirements that a waterfall project typically does. You need just enough. The team decides what that just enough is. And there's some back and forth. You determine with the team, the developer and the analyst together decide what is just enough. Another is that Agile can't really scale beyond that tiny team. Definitely we're seeing that is not true these days with the SAFe framework, the Scaled Agile framework. There's some others as well, but that Agile is now able to grow beyond that single team and scale, where you're seeing now product teams, trains, and whole companies go agile, where a whole org can be completely agile, and you take away the concept of projects really and move to products or departments that are agile focused and that are just continuous. So that's not true anymore, really. And that agile is kind of an undisciplined, easy approach. So if you don't want to really plan, then you just, take a free-for-all agile approach. That's not the case either. Agile is a lot of hard work. It takes a lot of collaboration. It takes people focused on, daily ownership of deliverables, focused on commitments. There's a lot of accountability. There's a lot of eyes on what your commitments are. There's a lot of demonstration. That it really is a lot of work and a lot of ownership for your team members. It's not at all the easy way out. There's a lot to it. So it's not the undisciplined approach whatsoever.
Especially I like this point about agile projects are not faster, because I heard quite often when especially if you have internal competition, when another team comes in and say, okay, we can do it faster because we are agile. We don't need, we can just sit side by side with SME. We don't need to document anything, etc. We build the robot and bam, it's done within a week or two, etc. And here, this is really important to understand that agile is not about faster, but about more precise. It is about getting this constant feedback, which would allow you on the end not to end up with a product which you planned 3 months ago or 6 months ago and without previous experience with planning similar projects, but it is methodology which allows you to achieve high value result even if you never did the similar things, with just going, exploring, trying, failing as well, and fixing while going. But it doesn't necessarily mean faster, or it doesn't necessarily mean skip the documentation, especially as Tracy mentioned in RPA world, when you need to document all the steps to pass it later to developers, and not only for development but also for so-called business contingency. Once the robot stops by some reason and you don't have any more people trained in the business, you still want to be able to refer to documents and ask whoever, saying, here is your level 5 documentation or PDD or however you call it, try to execute the steps, and you still end up with the given result. Yeah, so documentation is also quite important here, and I really appreciate, Tracy, you brought those things, because and I wish some of my customers also heard that, because it's really important to understand agile is not about getting things faster, but mainly getting it more precise. And you described for us already kind of core criteria of agile, which I don't think that will be much changing with the time. So those are the ones you mentioned on the manifesto for agile. But still, I believe that there is some space for improvement. And if we are to dream a little bit about how do you see agile as a methodology in another 15 years? Yeah. So if we imagine that we are now in the middle and we add another 15 years to this exciting journey, what do you see will be improving in the technology, in methodology itself?
So I would love to see, continued focus on value. Value is the name of the game. So even more focus on value, better ways to calculate benefits, minus costs, but easier ways to calculate value and to discern value of items for priority's sake in light of risk. So value is the name of the game. If people could calculate value item by item, I think priority would be so much easier in business today. So value, just across the project management spectrum is the name of the game in project prioritization these days, for sure. So organizational change management, it's so important in RPA. I think companies forget that people are scared of the idea of robots, that they're sitting in their chairs thinking, I may lose my job. In the end, the studies show that people are happier once RPA is incorporated. If someone came up to you and said, hey, would you love for us to take over automating your timesheet or this terrible expense report that you do every week, people would say, yes, please do. But if they say, hey, let's just bring in RPA, and people don't understand it or the impact, they're scared. But a little time spent on organizational change management is so worthwhile. So incorporating organizational change management, assessing the impact of anything brought in. So RPA projects, Agile projects in general, ensuring that the organization knows what is happening from their perspective of each individual, what's in it for them, the perspective of the stakeholders, that increases the likelihood of that change being well received. So that has been a big feature of project management, the incorporation of OCM the past 10 years or so. I think that Agile would be well served to really focus on that communication over the next few years. And then continuing to mature the scalability, making it simpler, making the terms more well-known. There's so many, trains and pigs and chickens, and people get a little scared about hearing all the weird verbiage, and it can be a little scary from the outside. That some of the diagrams can be a little scary. It can be a little overwhelming when people see it, and they can want to run away. So love to see Agile grow, and maybe it be a little less scary. Maybe the barrier of entry be a little less to the idea of growing Agile in an organization. And I'd love to see Agile PMOs grow, that the concept of those grow more, see more of those where PMOs are supporting lean and Agile practices, they're coordinating things, they're removing impediments, and see more of those proliferate where that's not an uncommon concept, where PMOs are not this negative thing, but a supportive environment, not this, negative reporting factory barrier, that organizations think of negatively, but something that really supports the idea of Agile and the enterprise that people look to for helping them innovate and move things forward.
Got it. Thank you very much, Tracy. And we are getting to the last point of our episode, and this is quite traditional already to our listeners. I use always to ask, what are 5 do's out of best practices? What are the things you would like to encourage people doing while using Agile methodology? As well as later, the following question would be, what are 5 do's to do if you want to properly screw it up? Or in other words, what are the 5 don'ts, right? So what are 5 do's and don'ts in Agile methodology?
So first, always keep the focus on where it should be, the value to the customer. Second, definitely empower your Agile teams. You want them to self-manage and handle their own issues, or it's not worth doing Agile in the first place if you're not going to yield that power to the team. So in Agile, third, we definitely need to expect the senior leadership to support and model Agile. If they want to see the benefits of Agile, they've got to go all in. Fourth, plan to improve continuously. Training is not a one-time thing. Start Agile training and expect to never stop. So improve again and again with every cycle. And then fifth, allow the team the opportunity to experiment and fail fast. Never look at failing fast as a negative. Always consider that to be something that is a great thing, that failing after a long period of time is a really bad thing, never failing fast. So those are my 5 do's.
Feels great after hearing those, and I think that it would make especially the development or delivery team feeling much more comfortable in their role and within their scope of delivery. When you have this trust, when you have this freedom to experiment, to have trust from the management, yes, support from the management, and believe into the thing that you are doing right things, and you can always get a feedback in a short iteration. So those are really great ones. And let's get to opposite. So 5 don'ts.
So don't. You can't have an agile team that is just made of IT. If you don't have collaboration between the business and IT, so a product owner from the business or someone representing the customer in that product owner role, then that is not an agile team that is going to work. You need someone that really understands value to the customer, so a really great business collaborator. The second, you can't have an agile team of 30 or 40 people. That does not work. You've got to have an appropriately sized team, typically less than 10. Otherwise, it's just far too large to function. Third, you can't expect that the full team is going to understand everything 100% after their first agile training. Some people will take a little longer. Some people will need encouragement from the Scrum Master thereafter. Everyone will need more than one training. So expect to train throughout. The company will need to provide trainings. Everyone will need to continuously train thereafter, both individually and company supported. Fourth, don't assume that agile means agile. If you guys call a meeting a Scrum, it doesn't. Evaluate the practices on your team and, evaluate how you guys are supporting those methodologies. Look at the Agile Manifesto and look at those core values to evaluate whether or not you're really practicing Agile methodologies or not. And then 5, never prevent teams from experimenting. If you find that you're not willing to allow teams some time to experiment, then really evaluate why that is. If they can't have an opportunity to fail fast, then they'll end up failing long-term at some point in a bigger way, in a much more expensive way. So figure out why that is. It doesn't make sense in an agile world.
Correct. And this is what I think is very appreciated by developers again, and sometimes it can be even a reason for leaving a company if you have to do what you say to do and you don't have any space for creativity, space for freedom in those testing, experimenting, trying new things, plugging it in, etc. So that's definitely very critical here, and I think that Agile gives more freedom and more empowerment to final delivery team, but not only to a management who on the end would also appreciate it. It is a change of mindset, because in traditional management you tend to control, right, and tend to go and look after everything and tell everyone how to do, etc. But as a manager also, and here Tracy, probably you could agree with this, that as a manager you would also appreciate accountability within a team. Not that all the accountability is just with you and you are the only one who takes all the responsibility and everything. Yeah, you are still accountable, that's right, but you spread the responsibility and you spread this encouragement of others to deliver it as a one product together, but not as an achievement of the great manager while controlling and handling the people.
Right, for sure. It's always a team effort in Agile. It's never a one person. The Scrum Master is there to stand in the shadows and support as needed, but stands back and allows the team to shine.
Good. Tracy, that's it. I highly appreciate this episode and your involvement. I think that we discussed quite a lot of valuable information for our audience. I would also leave all the materials which we discussed during this episode on our website, so they would be able to go and click through the websites we have mentioned, or I would also add some visuals which are representing Agile quite well. So all of those they would be able to find on our website. And for now, Trace, again, I just want to thank you for your contribution and looking forward to have another discussion with you.
I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you. That's it. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this episode and learned something new. Don't forget to visit our web automationimpact.io and share this episode on social media. It helps to grow and develop the podcast. Thank you.